There are times when even the toughest people shake a little. When the guys who used to give hope to millions suddenly hit really dark days themselves. For more than 40 years, Pastor Rick Warren has been like a guide, a teacher, and a rock for Christians all over the world. But behind all the preaching, the super famous books, and the big name everyone knows, his own life has been full of pain, huge losses, and a sickness that made him walk away from everything he spent his life building. What happened to the guy who taught everyone else how to find purpose when his own body and heart started falling apart? The man who started a church with nothing. Rick Warren's story starts way before TV interviews and bestseller lists. He was born Richard Dwayne Warren on January 28, 1954, in San Jose, California, and grew up in a tiny town called Ukiah, more famous for quiet vineyards than giant churches. His dad, Jimmy Warren, was a simple Baptist pastor who also worked as a carpenter, literally building churches brick by brick for poor communities. His mom, Dot Warren, was a librarian, super calm and smart, and she got her son hooked on books and curious about everything. They raised their kids in a house where faith wasn't just something you did on Sunday, it was how you lived every day. From when he was little, Rick soaked up everything about being a pastor. He watched his dad drive from one small town to the next, fixing church roofs, repairing benches, and preaching to people who were really struggling. It wasn't fancy, but it was real, honest work that helped people. One night when he was a kid, Rick heard his dad crying and praying, "Lord, just let me build one more church before I die." That one line stuck with him forever. In school, Rick wasn't the coolest kid or the star athlete, but he knew exactly where he was going. While other teens were messing around, he was eating heavy books about God, leadership, and the Bible. By his last year at Ukiah High School, he was already running Bible studies and helping classmates. In 1972, right before graduating, he started the first Christian club on campus called Fishers of Men Club. That was a big deal in a public school back then when everything was changing fast. Rick clearly didn't care about fitting in. After high school, he went to California Baptist University in Riverside and got his Bachelor of Arts degree. College was huge for him, it made his faith stronger and totally clear what he was supposed to do with his life. In November 1973, he ditched class with a buddy and drove 350 miles to San Francisco to hear the famous preacher W.A. Criswell speak at the Jack Tar Hotel. After the talk, Rick waited in line just to shake the guy's hand. When he finally got there, Criswell suddenly put his hands on Rick's head and said, "I feel led to pray for you. You're going to make a difference for God." Rick always said that moment felt like God himself saying, "Yep, this is your path." He kept studying and got a Master of Divinity from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas, in 1979, and later a Doctor of Ministry from Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. But degrees weren't what made him special, it was the huge dream in his heart. Most new pastors looked for comfy jobs at old churches, but Rick felt called to start something brand new, not just another church for people who already believed, but a place for broken, doubting, totally done with religion people. So in 1980, with his young wife Kay, he loaded everything they owned into a U-Haul and moved to Orange County, California. No money, no building, no people, just faith. Rick started going door to door asking strangers, "Why don't you go to church?" He heard stuff like, "It's boring, it's not about real life, I don't feel wanted." Those answers became the whole plan for his new church. That same year, on Easter Sunday, April 6, 1980, Rick and Kay held their very first service in a little theater at Laguna Hills High School. 205 people came, and most of them had never stepped foot in a church before. His first sermon was called, "A Daring Faith." It wasn't just a talk, it was like a battle cry. That day, Saddleback Church was born, not as some fancy religious building, but as a fresh start for hurting people. That Easter morning, Rick had no clue that little group would grow into one of the biggest, most famous churches on the planet, but like he always said, God doesn't need perfect people, just willing ones. And that willingness, that crazy belief that something tiny could change the world, was the spark that started everything, the rise of a worldwide pastor. What began in a rented high school theater blew up fast into something nobody, not even Rick, saw coming. By the early 1980s, Saddleback Church was growing quicker than any new church in Southern California. Every week, hundreds of new people showed up, not for pretty windows or old traditions, but for something way simpler, real talk. Rick's sermons felt like a friend chatting with you, full of everyday advice about relationships, purpose, and pain. He didn't talk down to people, he talked with them. But it was super hard at first. For years, Saddleback had no real home. Rick and his tiny team called themselves the Church with Wheels. Every Sunday before sunrise, volunteers set up folding chairs, speakers, and baby rooms in rented gyms, schools, community centers, even giant tents. Then right after service, they packed it all up again. It was tiring, but Rick saw it as God testing them. He said, "We didn't have a building, but we had a vision, and that was enough." Finally in 1993, after 13 years of moving around, Saddleback built its first real building in Lake Forest, California. It wasn't about the building, it was about sticking with it, trusting God, and seeing purpose win. By then the church had over 10,000 people coming every week, and it was just getting started. In 1995, Rick wrote a book called The Purpose-Driven Church that explained everything he learned about growing a healthy church. The big idea was super simple but changed everything. Every church should focus on 5 things the Bible talks about: worship, hanging out together, growing as disciples, serving others, and telling the world about Jesus. When churches do those 5 things, they grow on their own. Pastors all over the world started using it as their playbook. In just a few years, over 200,000 church leaders got trained in the purpose-driven way. But his next book made him crazy famous. On October 1, 2002, The Purpose-Driven Life came out. It wasn't a textbook or just for pastors, it was for regular people asking, "Why am I even here?" It was a 40-day journey with daily reading, praying, and thinking about finding real meaning beyond money or fame. The simple message hit people hard. In months it sold over 1 million copies. By 2005, more than 20 million. By 2020, over 50 million copies in 85 languages, the best-selling hardcover nonfiction book ever in America. It changed lives way outside church. Celebrities, politicians, and athletes started saying it saved them. Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps read it in rehab and said it gave him a new outlook. Ashley Smith read parts of it out loud to the guy who took her hostage and it helped save her life. Even Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama quoted it in speeches. But all the fame and money didn't change Rick. Instead of buying fancy stuff, he did the opposite. He stopped taking his $110,000 church salary, paid back 25 years of old paychecks, and promised to give away 90% of everything he made. He called it reverse tithing. He said, "I didn't write the book to get rich, I wrote it to help people." He and Kay kept living in the same normal house they'd had forever. People trusted him because he was real. While some TV preachers lived like kings, Rick stayed honest and open. He became someone millions looked up to, a guy who could connect faith, real life, and even politics. By the mid-2000s, Saddleback had over 20,000 people every weekend in churches all over the world from Berlin to Buenos Aires, plus online services reaching millions more. But behind the scenes, the stress never stopped. The guy teaching the world about purpose was secretly worn out, burned out, and crushed by leading so many people. But Rick was about to learn the hardest stuff was still coming. No amount of faith or fame could get him ready for what happened next. The night everything changed. For years, Rick and Kay's marriage showed everyone how to keep going when things are tough. They had money fights, old hurts, and pain from abuse Kay went through before, but faith and counseling fixed it. They thought the worst was behind them. Then April 5, 2013 hit. Their youngest son Matthew had fought mental illness since he was tiny. Even as a little kid he had terrible depression and asked heartbreaking stuff like, "Why can't I just be normal? Why does it hurt so much?" Doctors, therapists, pastors, everyone tried to help. Matthew loved Jesus, served at church, and cared about other hurting people, but inside he was losing a fight no medicine or prayer could completely win. That night he hung out with his parents and everything seemed okay. Then in one awful moment of total darkness, he took his own life. He was only 27. Rick called it pain that words can't touch. In an email to the church he wrote, "Our youngest son Matthew was an incredibly kind, gentle, and compassionate young man. He had a brilliant mind and a gift for feeling other people's pain, but he struggled from birth with mental illness, dark holes of depression, and suicidal thoughts. Even with the best doctors, medicine, and prayers in America, the torture never went away." The whole world was shocked. But what hurt worse were cruel comments from some Christians blaming the family and saying their faith wasn't strong enough. Rick didn't fight back angry, he answered with kindness. He said, "People ask why God didn't heal Matthew here. I tell them he did, just not on this side of heaven." It came from a totally broken heart that still held on to hope. turning pain into purpose. After 4 months away, Rick came back and preached a series called, How to Get Through What You're Going Through. It was super raw and real. He told everyone, take your biggest hurt and make it the biggest message of your life. He and Kay started talking openly about mental health in church, something a lot of churches ignored back then. They started Hope for Mental Health to make churches safe places for people who feel depressed or suicidal. Kay became a huge voice for kindness and real help. Together they teamed up with doctors, counselors, and churches everywhere. Their goal, nobody should suffer alone. It helped so many people. Thousands of families wrote to say thank you for finally talking about the pain they hid. Rick got over 10,000 letters from people fighting the same thing. He kept saying, you can love Jesus and still have depression. Faith and mental health aren't enemies. But while he helped others heal, his own body started giving up. The guy who carried everyone else now had his own invisible fight, one that would force him out of the pulpit for good. The toughest battle. In 2021, Rick told everyone he has something called spinalis, a rare brain disorder that makes his muscles spasm like crazy. The spasms hurt bad and come out of nowhere, especially when he's excited or stressed. Preaching several services every weekend became impossible. At night he barely slept, his back muscles would jerk for hours. Doctors also found another weird brain problem they started calling Warren syndrome that stops his body from handling adrenaline right, so he feels shaky, confused, and hurts all the time. Then in 2022 he got hit with an autoimmune disease that causes non-stop swelling and muscle pain 24/7. For a guy whose whole life needed energy and clear thinking, it crushed him. He once said, when I don't talk my feelings out with God, my body takes the hit. He realized his body couldn't handle leading anymore. In June 2021, after 41 years, he retired as senior pastor of Saddleback Church. His church family was totally shocked. The man who started it all was stepping away. But even then he didn't talk about losing, he talked about trusting God. He said, this isn't the end, it's the beginning of the beginning. He handed the job to Andy Wood, a 40-year-old pastor from San Jose, and his wife Stacy. Some people complained at first, but after checking everything, the church said they were the right ones. Rick became founding pastor, instead, focusing on training new leaders and global missions through his Finishing the Task group. Legacy and looking back. Even retired, Rick Warren still changes the world. The Purpose-Driven Life is still one of the most life-changing Christian books ever. Saddleback Church, which started in a living room, now has tens of thousands of people every week all over the world. The Peace Plan, the HIV/AIDS work, and Hope for Mental Health have helped more people than numbers can show. When he talks now, you hear someone who's been through the worst, not bragging, just understanding pain. He says stuff like, everybody needs recovery because nobody's perfect. Rick Warren's life shows that faith isn't about never hurting, it's about having the strength to keep walking anyway. From losing his son to fighting sickness 267, from worldwide fame to a weak body, his story proves even the strongest hearts can shake and still believe. Rick once wrote, you were made by God and for God, and until you get that, life will never make sense. Do you think pain can still have purpose? Tell us what you think below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today.